Hello and welcome to the first in a new series of videos brought to you by NAHT and NAHT Edge, in which we speak to interesting people from the world of education, get their advice and tips. My first guest is Sonia Gill. Sonia is an educational consultant. She's also the author of this book, Successful Difficult Conversations in Schools. Now, I know that's a topic that many school leaders will wrestle with, and it's a topic that people would be interested to hear more about. So welcome, Sonia. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
First question then, so what inspired you to write the book? What prompted you to put pen to paper?
It's a topic I've been training school leaders on for over 7 years. I really see the difference mastering this skill makes, and by writing the book I thought I could help even more school leaders make their difficult conversations even more successful. That and the fact, and a lot of head teachers kept saying to me, you need to write a book.
So if we think about these conversations, what is it about them that makes them so difficult? I think we hear that phrase a lot. People talk about got to have a difficult conversation, but when we boil it down, why is it that they're so hard to have?
I think there are a million answers I could give to this question, but I think fundamentally it boils down to two things. I think one, most people don't like having to deliver a message that's going to upset the other person. We're human, we don't like upsetting people, and I think in schools, school leaders, it's a nurturing environment. So that's reason one. The second reason is most of us have never been trained in how to have these conversations. We're so well trained as teachers, at least I think we are, but we get tons of support on child behaviour, on learning strategies. Often when we become a leader of adults, we don't get anywhere near a comparable amount of training, and this is a topic that I think many school leaders haven't been trained on.
So why is it so important we have them? Because let's face it, we've all been there, and the temptation is to duck them. I'd admit to that myself as a school leader, having ducked some difficult conversations, and it's tempting to do it because it's going to be hard. So why would you urge people to pluck up the courage and go ahead and have that conversation?
It's what the conversation changes that's important. So in schools right now, people who are watching this, there'll be a range of issues in their schools which aren't resolving. They're either avoiding the conversation or they're having the conversation. They're not getting the change they want. Classic issues I've seen in hundreds of schools are things like lateness, sadly often a TA. I'm not having a go at TAs, but often a late TA, marking, not being up to standard, and then conduct issues. The fact that I'm a bit miserable, or I'm a bit of an energy drainer. I'm always the person who, when you present in staff meetings, I sit there with my special face and suck the life out of everyone in the room. Now, people don't do these things often on purpose or through any malice, but nobody's talking to them about it. Multiply those issues across a school, across all of our schools, and they're blocking school improvement. And I often think about, if you think of just 3 of those issues, whether it's marking or someone who takes the energy out of a room, someone who's late, whatever it is, if you think about those and then imagine if they were fixed. Person's still there, but they're on time, they're marking well. Actually, they give constructive criticism, that helps move something forward. You'd see a really big step forward in the effectiveness of leaders and what the schools are able to do.
So in your experience, have you sort of found that these conversations can be transformational in a positive way? Because I suppose often we worry about how they're going to go and how the person's going to receive them. But if we get them right, have you seen where actually they have a real positive impact on schools?
Countless times. And I think that's what really fuels me, myself in this work. Because, it's a bit of a naff topic when you think about it, isn't it? Successful, difficult conversations. But as you say, it is transformational for the school leader having the conversation, but also for the person on the receiving end. And I don't think we can underestimate what that does for the individuals, for the school, and for the children that are being educated.
So let's start talking about getting these conversations right. I think we've established that you need to have them. I think people probably deep down know that. The real challenge is, as you say, getting them right. People haven't necessarily had the training and are worried about it. Now, in your book, I kind of noticed you talk about 3 sort of core components that you think are sort of central to getting those right. Could you say a bit more about those?
Yes. These 3 core components are crucial to get right if you want to have what I call the intelligent conversations. This is the conversation in our heads. If everything went well, we would be having. It'd be a meeting of mind, professional dialogue. But when we don't have all 3 of these core components in place, we see common problems appear. So it's probably easiest if I talk about the components in relation to their problems. So component one is structure. And when that's not in place, we often have the problem of you have a conversation with me, you think you've been really clear, you've explained it, you've kind of explained it from several different ways, but actually I walk out the room and you think, I didn't really understand the message you were trying to give. And that's down to structure. We haven't been clear in our delivery. A big one is emotional management. So these conversations are exhausting. We go in, we deliver a message, the other person might cry, might get upset, might withdraw and clam up. And then that has a knock-on effect to us, and we can end up getting pulled into quite an emotional interchange, or at least be really wrestling not to get drawn into emotional interchange. And again, that's down to how well we manage those emotions. And then an absolutely fundamental building block is that of building trust, building a safe space. So actually believing the words I'm giving as a leader, what I'm saying is truly meant, and it's not kind of a bit of an agenda elsewhere. People can misread what we're saying non-verbally or interpret incorrectly what we're saying non-verbally. So when that happens, what tends to happen is I might agree to everything you say, but when I walk out the room, I won't do any of it. And that's a common problem people find. So yeah, they're the three components.
Right, so that's really useful. And I'm keen to get into some sort of specifics as well. Yeah. So you talked about sort of the structure there. Would you advise that people almost sort of plan out these conversations? I mean, teachers are used to lesson planning. Is there a sort of similarity there? Actually, you can plan a difficult conversation in advance to an extent?
I wouldn't script an entire conversation, definitely not. I absolutely would recommend scripting the opening sentence.
Why is that? Why would you say script that opening bit? Because you talk about that in the book. That's really interesting.
It really makes a huge difference to the success that you have. So one of those big problems where somebody walks out without having heard your message is because we haven't been clear. And what happens is we go into a conversation, and often when we're talking to someone about an issue, we're talking about the issue. What we're not talking about is actually what we want to happen, the outcome. We go into the conversation, the person might look at us with a face like thunder, it throws us off course. Various things happen in that interaction that means that we don't actually deliver a clear message. So if we plan it and script it, and there's a structure I use, we can increase the likelihood that we're talking about the right thing. The other thing is it stops many problems like the conversation getting pulled off track. So I talk to you about marking, and suddenly you're talking about everybody else's marking. And then we're talking about that, or you're talking about how playtimes are now, they're too unruly, or lunch times are too noisy. And so we start talking about that, and you walk out, and what happened to your marking? So having that first sentence clearly structured, worked on, and as I say, I do really recommend a structure that I use, it's in the book, that increases the likelihood of success. There is a structure that follows on from that, but it's really just a guide. It's not to be scripted, because once I've said what the issue is and what we need to talk about, I don't know what you're going to say, so I can't possibly script the rest of the conversation.
So let's talk about something you said there about how people have a knack sometimes of pulling you off track, because that happens in a difficult conversation. You go in clearly, with an idea of what you want to talk about, and 20 minutes later you realise you're talking about something entirely, different.
Yeah.
Any advice to people if they find themselves in that situation where someone is desperately trying to derail the conversation or trying to divert it?
Yeah, absolutely. Be really clear about what outcome you're looking for. So if it is about you marking your books more frequently, that's what it needs to be. And say to somebody, you're happy to talk about all of those things that they're raising, but actually ask them to arrange a time, because you've arranged this meeting to talk about their marking. And just park it there. In my experience, people never arrange that time. But if they do, fine, talk about those issues. But actually, you've arranged this meeting so you can talk about what you want to without disrespecting those issues.
We talked a bit about the beginning of the meeting, but I guess equally important, and I know from the book you think is equally important, is the end of the meeting, because that can be tricky for people. How do I bring this to a close? How do I bring it to a close in such a way that actually people follow up what we've been talking about? Any advice around bringing meetings to a sort of close in a successful way? Yeah,
so my structure is called STORM as an acronym, and the first bit is state the issue, and that's the opening. Going to the end of that structure is M, move on and follow up. So what I say is, move on is actually acknowledge that we just had a difficult conversation, and hopefully it didn't go horrendously wrong. There'll be some positives in there. So kind of acknowledge that we can talk about this tough stuff and it's okay. Pay homage to it if you like. And then arrange a time to follow up. Whatever's appropriate for the issue. It might be a week, it might be a day, it might be a half term. But arrange a time to follow up and see either how agreed actions are going, to kind of keep the dialogue open. And hopefully when you do follow up, you'll be saying, great, you're doing exactly what we were hoping for, this has improved, wonderful. If not, you've given yourself permission to go back to, okay, well, we still need to improve this. When you don't do that, it feels a bit awkward sometimes. Like, oh, I spoke to James about that and he's still not doing it, and now I need to go back and start again. Whereas if I know I'm talking to you Friday next week, then I can just go and talk to you Friday next week.
So let's talk about when things go wrong, and well, perhaps more mistakes to avoid. Are there any really obvious pitfalls, the don'ts of difficult conversations that you would sort of talk about?
Yeah, there are a lot. What are my top ones? I'd definitely say hold the silence. Yeah, I see
Which
people.
Is difficult, isn't it, to do?
It's painful.
Holding a long silence, yeah.
You know, you've been thinking about this issue for a while, you're aware of it, the other person may or may not, but they're going to need some time to process, to think, to maybe think about accept that they're having an emotional reaction, and they're entitled to their reaction, not an extreme one, but they are. But get comfortable with just allowing there to be some silences. And a good trick to help you hold it for longer is, if you can, have a clock visible. And if you're thinking, I need to hold the silence and it's really hard, just see how long it actually is, because 10 seconds will feel like an hour. So hold the silence is one really key one, I would say.
Okay, and one final question, I think, for me then. If, there's an awful lot we've talked about. If people could only take one thing away, if you said, I could give you one tip on difficult conversations, one thing that next time you have one of these conversations, don't forget this, what would that one tip be?
Be clear on your outcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you ever so much for joining me. And
pleasure.
Thank you for coming in. Don't forget, Sonia's book is available. If you've enjoyed our conversation, you can buy that and read more about these difficult conversations. We'll see you next time.